I'm Ruby Jones, and you're listening to 7am. Over the past week, Labor Minister Anika Wells has become the face of a new debate over politicians' perks. Revelations about an almost $100,000 trip to New York to talk up Australia's teen social media ban at the UN, followed by reports of taxpayer-funded family travel to grand finals, ski fields and overseas sporting events, have seen her refer 3.5 years of expenses to the parliamentary watchdog. The Prime Minister insists her claims are within the rules, but the backlash and further questions over the spending of other MPs from all parties has opened up a bigger argument about whether the rules are fair and whether they match public expectations in a cost of living crisis. Today, Press Gallery journalist Karen Middleton on parliamentary entitlements and whether this scandal will force change. It's Thursday, December 11. So, Karen, the story of Anika Wells' spending, I think, begins when it became clear what the cost of her recent trip to New York to speak at the UN General Assembly came to light. So tell me what we know.
Well, that was back in September, and the government was spruiking its impending social media ban. And what we now know is that she took a senior staff member and a public servant with her, and the total cost of their flights was something like $94,000.
For example, were they first-class flights? And given the government's kind of sensitivity to cost of living issues, do you think it passes the pub test?
No, they weren't first-class flights. We will disclose further through the usual IPIA processes that haven't rolled out yet.
We've been told they were business class flights. We know they were at the last minute. Obviously, they had to rustle up these flights quickly, but we haven't seen the detail. And no matter which way you slice and dice it, it's very hard to get to a $94,000 bill for 3 return flights for New York, even just for 3 days. So that is how this all came to be subject to scrutiny, and now we've seen a whole litany of issues come to light.
So what else has been uncovered?
Well, her travel and her use of the family reunion entitlements, which exist under the Parliamentary Expenses Scheme.
Communications Minister Anika Wells is under increased scrutiny over her use of taxpayer dollars for travel. There's now questions raised over a trip to Thredbo, Boxing Day test matches and the Formula One Grand Prix.
Politicians are allowed to bring their families to work events. They obviously have to be judicious about this. And Minister Wells is also the sports minister, so she goes to a lot of sporting events. And it seems she's taken her family to some of those events. Her husband's gone to the AFL Grand Final with her. Her husband and children met up with her when she went to an event at Thredbo during the winter, and they had a ski weekend there together. And we've also seen when she went to the Olympic Games in Paris, there's been some questions about the expenditure that occurred there. One very expensive dinner the night they arrived in particular that seems to add up to something like more than €1,000. So a lot of questions being asked about what is being portrayed by some critics as a pattern of behaviour of liberal use of expenses. Now, she argues she's done nothing wrong. It's all within the guidelines.
As a parliamentarian, I have followed the rules and made myself available for these questions, as I'll continue to do. But just for the absolute avoidance of doubt, like Mark says, this has all been through IPIA. I have been found to have followed the guidelines so far, but for the absolute avoidance of doubt, I'm happy for
And then that has raised questions about the guidelines themselves.
Yeah, let's talk a little more about how Wells has responded as the pressure has mounted over this. What has she said?
Well, I think part of the issue is that the government's response initially from the minister herself and then the Prime Minister to that first allegation was, well, it was an important thing, so of course she should go.
This is about one of the most important public policy challenges of our time. The event that Emma spoke at, the event that Let Them Be Kids in 36 months, hosted alongside the Prime Minister and I, was attended by multiple world leaders, the President of the EU, and
they've opened themselves up to these questions by the nature of their response.
I'll tell you what, a trip to New York for 2 days is work. That's not fun. I flew to Washington.
Worth $100,000?
I flew to Washington recently. It would have cost more than $100,000.
Okay, so Albanese is at this point defending Anika Wells, saying this is all within the accepted rules. What's the opposition made of it?
They have made hay, is what they have made. This is a gift from the political gods at a time when all the focus, remember, has been on the opposition and what a shambolic state it's in. So they have grabbed this and run with it as hard as possible.
This is part of a pattern of behaviour that we're seeing from this minister, and she's throwing around taxpayer money like it's confetti.
Melissa McIntosh, she's been out there criticising Anika Wells, so it's not surprising there's been a bit of a peek under the lid to make sure that her expenses are in order, having taken her son with her on a work trip, which also coincided with a judo competition that he was in.
So in June 2023, you travelled to the Gold Coast.
Yeah.
And at that time, your son Byron was in the Australian National Judo Championships. So can you confirm you claimed $760 in travel allowance and $1,008 in return flights? Did that include your son's flight?
My son's flight to Queensland.
We've seen some questions about a couple of the Greens' use of family entitlement and other members of Parliament as well. I think Minister Don Farrell, the Trade Minister in the government, he's got quite a large expenditure using the family reunion entitlement. So we're now seeing this expand, and this is what happens. It becomes a war where if you attack us, we'll attack you. But finally, after a week and a half of all of this, we saw the minister announce that she's asked the independent authority to audit her expenses.
The embattled Sports Minister Anika Wells has asked the independent watchdog to audit her travel expenses after days of mounting pressure. The minister has been under fire.
She believes they're all in line, but she's done that to try and just stop this story on the eve of the social media ban because it was just getting out of control.
Okay, so everyone is claiming that their behaviour is within the guidelines. However, it does seem like that is not satisfying journalists, members of the public. So what does that tell you, I suppose, about the disparity between what might actually be allowed and, I suppose, what people expect?
Well, this is the big problem. In a cost of living crisis in particular, but any time really, the public expect a judicious use of what is, in the end, their money. They don't begrudge parliamentarians having their families with them, I think. Now and then, I think people accept that parliamentarians mostly work hard. And, you know, the argument is also being put that if you want to encourage people with young children into politics, then you need to make provision to ensure that they get to see their families a reasonable amount when they have to be away from home a lot. But I do think there is this sense that judgment needs to be applied as well as just the letter of the law. And I think that's where the question is coming in. It's about the optics of this and whether judgment is being applied and that this is the best, most judicious use of taxpayers' money.
Coming up, politicians have lost their jobs over spending scandals, so will Wells withstand public scrutiny? Karen, taxpayer and travel expenses are a trap that politicians seem to fall into more often than you might think. So what is unravelling now? How does that fit in to, I guess, the history of expense scandals across the board, both sides of politics?
Ruby, we have seen this movie many times before. The longer you hang around politics and watch politicians, the more often you see this movie. Both sides, in terms of the major parties and their affiliates, have been involved in these kinds of scandals in the past. You know, we think most recently of things like Bronwyn Bishop's use of a helicopter to get to an event in Victoria.
You know, that helicopter, yes, I was short of time, but it is no excuse. And it was an error of judgment. And really, as I said, I want to apologise to the Australian people because I feel I've let them down.
We saw Susan Lee go to an auction while she was on a work trip to the Gold Coast when she was a minister under Malcolm Turnbull's government and buy herself an apartment.
An impulse purchase is how the Health Minister is explaining her decision to buy a luxury apartment on a taxpayer-funded trip. Susan Lee bought the unit on the Gold Coast during a 2015 work visit.
The purchase of this particular property was neither planned nor anticipated.
She ended up losing her ministerial portfolio as a result of that. We've seen under the Howard government, he lost 6 ministers to travel rorts allegations. So history is littered with examples of this. Like Stuart Robert, when he was a minister in the coalition government, went on a work trip to China, was accepting gifts, portrayed himself in a manner that wasn't necessarily strictly with his portfolio. We had a business partner there. You know, lots of examples of these things that people have got into trouble. They can snowball. They can become a huge deal, not only for the person involved, but also for the government or the party that they're associated with. And people hate the misuse or the alleged misuse of entitlements, and especially when they're feeling under financial pressure. So the other thing here, and this is probably something that Anika Wells needs to think about, is that she's the sports minister, and that's a fun portfolio. So she's going to things for work that other people go to for fun. And I think there's an argument that when you have a job like that, yes, it's a job, it takes you away from home a lot, you need to be extra alert to how it might look, because you're probably already going to these things for free. You're getting paid to go there, things that other people have to pay for and do in their leisure time. So you probably need to think twice if you want, on top of that, to claim extra expenses and bring along the family. You just need to be aware of how that looks. And that might be more true in that portfolio and in, say, the arts portfolio than in one that is involving obligations that perhaps are less fun.
Yeah, and, you know, many of those politicians that you mentioned, they have lost positions, at least temporarily, because or as a result of a scandal around this. So ultimately, do you get the sense that Wells' spending is going to withstand public scrutiny?
I think we don't really know the answer to that yet. I think, as we've discussed, she's made this decision to ask the authority to do an audit. She fully expects that that audit will find she's done nothing wrong under the guidelines, which we've already talked about. The announcement of that audit was really just designed as a political circuit breaker. It was supposed to try and stop this snowball effect. But it depends what they find, and we still haven't got an answer to the original question, which is how on earth did 3 flights to New York cost $94,000? People do want to know the answer to that. And then there are a whole lot of other things that come after that have emerged that need an explanation. And I think, you know, the eternal lesson for the protagonists in all of these incidents is that you're much better off to be upfront, explain yourself, and that makes it a lot less likely that this kind of ongoing digging will occur. Now, it's the obvious question when the first line of defence is, well, it's within the guidelines. If the public doesn't feel satisfied with the answer, the obvious comeback is, well, the guidelines must need looking at. It doesn't seem like the Prime Minister is inclined to review the guidelines. That would make him quite unpopular with all of his colleagues and everyone across the Parliament. So he'll be trying to contain this and make sure that this review is the end of it. But on the face of it, the public doesn't seem satisfied that the system is working in the best way it can to make the best use of taxpayers' resources.
Well, Karen, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Ruby.
Also in the news today, advocates say Indigenous children continue to be removed from families at rates they have called obscene. The Family Matters report, released this week by the Secretariat of National Aboriginal and Islander Childcare, has found Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children are almost 10 times more likely to be removed from their parents than non-Indigenous children. The report found they also make up 45% of those in out-of-home care. The group's chief executive, Catherine Little, says not enough money is being spent on early intervention and community-led support services to address issues like poverty, housing insecurity and racism. And almost half of Australians are concerned about how to afford Christmas this year, according to a survey from the Salvation Army, examining how the cost of living crisis is impacting families in the lead up to the holiday season. The survey found that more than 1.7 million Australians will reach out to charity this year, with half doing so for the first time. It also found that over 1 million Australians don't plan on talking to their children about Christmas this year over concerns they can't afford it. I'm Ruby Jones. This is 7am. Thanks for listening.